there, my name's Amy, and I wanted to go over just a little bit of thread basics with you. So if you're new to sewing or new to quilting, there's a lot of different threads out there, and at first it can be really overwhelming on what you want to use. So I'm going to go over a variety of different thread types and the different uses for all of them. We're going to start with my basic everyday, I use it for everything thread, which is an Aurifil 50 weight, okay? I typically use it in Dove Gray. This is not Dove Gray. This is, I think, maybe a little bit darker than Dove Gray. So you can buy it in a couple different size spools. This is the kind of standard size spool. So it'll be about this big when it's brand new. I have it in a million colors and I keep them on a spool rack behind me. I use one neutral. So either a lot of people use like a beige, a gray, a white, a black for their everyday piecing. They put that in their bobbin and in their top because you're never really going to see most of those threads. So for me, that's my 100% go-to. You can buy it in this size. They also come in cones. Cones are much bigger. I'll show you a cone. This is a cone of Aurifil. This is actually Dove Gray. So just to give you an idea in size, okay? So this is a 50 weight thread. It's a good general middle of the road, perfect for use in your machine. There's a couple different brands out there. I really like Aurifil or Wonderfil brand in that 40 to 60 weight, but in general, most of my piecing is done with an Aurifil 50 weight. Okay, so that's kind of your general everyday multi-purpose for your sewing machine itself. Now we're going to talk a little bit more if we're doing more hand stitching, or if you want to use a little bit of a thicker thread in your machine, in the top thread, to give you a little bit more definition in those stitches. So like I said, this is a 50 weight. Now it's going to be the opposite of what you think. So the lower the number, the thicker the weight. The higher the number, the thinner the thread, okay? So the next general weight down, different brands will have 40, 50, or 60 weight, so it just depends on the brand. Like I said, this is a 50. Aurifil's next size down is a 28. And the way you can tell with Aurifil especially is the color of the spool that they put it on, okay? So Aurifil puts their 50 weight on this orange. They put their 28 weight on this gray, and it's thicker, but it still works very nicely in my sewing machine as a top thread for like quilting. 28 still works really nicely for all of those things. It also works really nicely for hand stitching if you want to use it for hand stitching where you want the stitches to show, okay? And then here we have, this is actually Wonderfil, so it's a different brand. This is their 12 weight. They call it spaghetti, is what they call the 12 weight thread. It comes on these yellow spools like this, and this is a little bit heavier than the 28 weight, okay? So these spools tend to be a little bit smaller because you're not using this in your machine that you're like doing a ton of piecing, because you want to be able to see these stitches. So I do use this a lot when I am hand quilting. I love a 12 weight for hand quilting. I have even used 12 weight in my sewing machine. I have used it for top stitching when I'm quilting. I've used it for decorative stitches, and I use it occasionally in my serger. So this is a 12 weight, okay? Then typically you can find 5 weight, but this is an 8 weight. This is typically about as small as it goes. Both Aurifil and Wonderfil make 8 weight. It's also sometimes called pearl cotton. Wonderfil also calls it eleganza. It comes in this type of spool, which is green, or sometimes you'll even find it in little like round little balls. They almost look like little yarn balls, and that would be 8 weight. So 8 and 5 weight. All of my thread that you're seeing here so far has been 100% cotton. I prefer to stitch with mainly 100% cotton for all of these uses, okay? So that's mainly hand quilting and machine quilting, or all of those sizes. Now we're going to start getting in the thread that is above the 50 weight. So that means it's getting thinner and thinner and thinner. So the next one that I would talk about is an 80 weight, okay? This is an Aurifil 80 weight, which, as you can tell, the colors mean a lot for these threads. So their 50 weight isn't on an orange, but their 80 weight is actually on these beautiful wooden spools. The 80 weight is really nice for English paper piecing because you're going to be stitching by hand, but you don't want those stitches to be seen. So you want a really thin thread that's still going to be strong, but is going to blend. So I have a lot of colors of this because when I am doing English paper piecing and I want those stitches to kind of vanish into the background, I will try to pick a thread that will blend with the fabric so you don't even notice the stitches are there. So this is a really fine but still very strong thread, okay? And this is still 100% cotton. okay? Now we're gonna start to get into the not 100% cotton. We're gonna get into some polyester. There's a couple different polyester threads that I use, and I'm gonna tell you what I use them for. So the first one are these little tiny bobbins that are pre-wound with an 80 weight from Wonderfil. This is called Deco Bob. So it's the same weight as this, it's just a different brand. And you typically are gonna find it mostly on pre-wound bobbins, although you can find it on spools sometimes. But this, I carry this little pocket in my little hand sewing container, English paper piecing or hand stitching, okay? So this is where you're stitching two pieces of fabric together, but you don't really wanna see the thread. This is a really good option for that. You can use Deco Bob in your machine, and when you buy the bobbins, you can buy them pre-wound for the size bobbin that you have in your machine. So just keep that in mind. This is called a bobbinator. I like it because it allows you to carry a couple bobbins with you if you are hand stitching and keep a couple colors on hand. So this is all made by Wonderfil. And the last thread that I'm going to show you, and this is for quilting and sewing, is going to be Aurifil. This is 100 weight thread. This is teeny tiny, like really, really thin. I have it in all the neutrals. So I have it in all whites, creams, blacks, navies, grays, right? I have it in just neutrals. This is so thin. It's so thin. And so it's just something else that I could use for hand stitching, for English paper piecing, right? It's more of a personal preference. When I am hand stitching, I actually do prefer the Aurifil or the Aurifil. The Deco Bob sometimes is a little tricky to work with, I think. It's like slippery in the fingers, so I feel like it always like comes out of the needle hole too easily. So you thread it and then you're like stitching and then all of a sudden it came unthreaded and I have to fix it. So it works great. The stitches are hidden. I love all that about it, but it is a slipperier feel. So it's important to know that. Now, so like I said, all of them are cotton except for these two, which are made from Wonderfil, and it's Deco Bob and Aurifil, but all the rest are 100% cotton. The only other kind of thread that I keep in my house, obviously I have some decorative threads, right? So I have some, you know, shimmery golds, or I have some glow in the dark thread, and I even have like a clear thread, okay? So I do have all those. They're in my house and they're very specific use. You can stitch with some of that like golden thread to give stuff a little bit of glitter or shine, or glow in the dark thread to get that. A variety of companies make it. Wonderfil makes a ton of those. I would say more than Aurifil. They make a ton of those more specialty threads for you to use. The only other thread that I keep in my house in mass, and I'm going to open my drawer. This is my, I have a drawer here that is 100% filled with a gazillion colors of Isacord. This is what I use when I'm embroidering. So if I am using my embroidery machine and I am doing any type of machine applique or machine embroidery, I typically use this. This is a polyester. This is a 40 weight, and it is called Isacord. I find that this is really it's really stable. The thread doesn't break very much when it's doing all those tight stitches like in a machine applique or a machine embroidery. And it gives you a little bit of a shiny look, which I don't mind for applique and embroidery. I do not like it when I'm quilting. So I know some people will use this to quilt. I don't like the shininess. So it's something that you will notice as you start to use threads. Some threads are going to be super shiny. This one is super shiny looking, and some are going to be more matte. And I tend to lean towards a more matte look when I am quilting. And you get more matte, I think, when there's more cotton in it and less of the poly. So this is poly, but like I said, I have 35 colors of this. I do, because when you're doing applique or embroidery, it sometimes calls for very specific colors. And then this is that other ball shape that I was talking about, that if you get the 8 weight pearl cotton or eleganza from a Wonderfil, it sometimes will come in these little spools, and you can see I've thoroughly used these, and that's all that's left on them. Now there's tons of other thread out there, right? So I'm going to show you, like, there's nothing wrong with, here's some Gutterman, right? I have some Mettler, I think, in this drawer. Yep, here's Mettler. I have some coats. I have like a whole drawer of like random other bits and bobs of thread. The important thing is that you find the thread that works well for you, for your machine, and for your use. I know that there are certain people that swear by, you know, I only machine quilt with Glide cotton thread, or I only use Omni, or I only use Aurifil, or I only use Wonderfil. I have found that I use a variety of Isacord, Aurifil, and Wonderfil, and it depends on the use, and it depends on also what's available to me at that moment in time. So if I'm at a shop that carries a lot of Wonderfil and I need something for hand stitching in a color that matches, I'm going to get whatever 8 weight, 12 weight they have that I need. So it just depends. Here's the thing, buy the colors you need. You'll build up colors over time. You will find out what colors you use a lot more of. Like I hardly ever use black, but I use a lot of a dark gray. I use a lot of navy. I use a lot of grays and whites. And then I like find these weird colors like this that you think, what would that be good on? But it actually works well on quite a few things. This can read kind of green. It can read kind of turquoise. It can read kind of blue. It depends on the situation that I'm using it in. So I also really love variegated thread. So if you can see this guy, let me take its label off. It's really nicely variegated. My only recommendation is that when you're doing variegated thread, if you do it so that it's variegated and there's not a lot of differences in the color, which I tend to not buy those. But if it's like, you know, 3 shades of pink from like a medium to a dark to a really dark pink, you aren't going to notice that variegation very much. Whereas if you pick something like this that goes from yellow to green to red, that's a huge variation in color value. So you're really going to notice the variation more, and the variegation is really going to be emphasized, which I like. If I'm going to use variegation, I really want it to be emphasized. So I prefer to spend my money on wildly variegated thread rather than subtly variegated thread. If it's going to be that subtle, I might as well pick a solid, in my opinion. So that's kind of thread basics, thread 101. If you have any questions about what type of thread, or if you have your favorite thread or what your machine loves, like my Bernina loves Aurifil and it loves Wonderfil. I get a little bit more linty when I use certain weights of each thread, but in general, the 50 weight Aurifil, my machine loves, hardly ever breaks, hardly ever comes unthreaded. And so I just find that it's what works for me. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the other brands. I say buy the thread that works for you. You don't want it to break. You don't want it to make as big of a mess, right? So if every time you sew, you open up your little, your faceplate and you see that it's covered in dust or lint, that's a sign that maybe to try a different thread, because the amount of lint that comes off of that then gets jammed into the crevices of your machine can lead to problems if you're not cleaning it often. So find a thread that works for you. And if you have a different thread that I didn't mention, comment below and let me know so I can go check them out and give them a try. Have a great day and go buy some thread.